Do sales conversations make you feel awkward or pushy? It's time to ditch the outdated salesy strategies. Your guide, Nikki Rausch, will show you how to combine kindness with selling skills to meet your prospects where they are, and in the process, how to up-level your influence and income. Learn how to earn business easily and effortlessly. Here's Nikki.
Welcome, and thank you for listening to the Sales Maven Show. I'm your host, Nikki Rausch. Today's episode is part of the Mastering Excellence series. This is a concept that comes from my background in neuro-linguistic programming, where we learn that there is a structure to excellence. And once you understand the structure around a topic that somebody is excelling at, you can apply that structure to your own life or business or same topic and get similar results. Today's guest is Mark Raffan. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Mark. If you don't already know him, you may very well, because he's kind of a big deal. Mark Raffan is the founder and CEO of Negotiations Ninja, world-class negotiation training tailored to your needs. Mark is an entrepreneur, a sales and procurement veteran, a podcast host, a speaker, and a recognized negotiation expert. Mark has led C-suite negotiations for many years for a variety of companies and industries. Now running his own negotiations training company, Mark utilizes his extensive speaking experience to deliver engaging, usable, and market-relevant training to an underserved market. He is the co-host of two incredible podcasts, Negotiations Ninja podcast, and that's one of the top negotiation podcasts in the world, and Content Callout, which is about B2B content marketing. Mark is an expert in influence, persuasion, and negotiation, and has coached executives and teams in some of the largest companies in the world. And he's been referenced in Entrepreneur, Forbes, Thrive Global, and many other publications. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. With an introduction like that, I feel like I'm way more important than I actually am.
I disagree. And your introduction is probably just barely scratching the surface of all that you bring to the table. And I am just so excited to have this conversation with you. I know that we've had this kind of on our calendars for a while, and I just have been like, I cannot wait to dig into this topic. I feel like I've got some training in negotiations, and it's relevant in sales, but I don't think I've ever had the opportunity to really dig into a negotiations expert and hear their perspective on it. So the topic that you've agreed to share with us today is how to be an effective negotiator, because I think it's something that scares most entrepreneurs. Would you agree? Do you think people are scared by it?
Yeah, definitely. Because I think oftentimes people conflate negotiation with conflict. And a lot of people are afraid of conflict-based situations. And sometimes negotiation can get dicey and it can be conflict-oriented. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But because we often lack training in how to deal with conflict, especially if you didn't grow up in a house where conflict was normal and learning how to deal with conflict was normal, it becomes pretty challenging to deal with a lot of negotiations.
How would you, and these are not really the official questions for you, but how would you describe your experience of really getting to this place where you really do identify as a negotiations expert? Like, what got you here?
My career has always been in negotiation. So I've done a lot of work in sales and procurement. So I've sat on both sides of the corporate table. And when you live in those worlds, it just becomes something that you do on an ongoing basis. And certainly I learned a lot from a lot of different mentors, colleagues, and I've taken a lot of courses and read a ton of books, and I've tried to apply as much as I can. And now I'm able to sort of pull together all of that information and make it work for me, and obviously a bunch of other people as well. And for me, I think especially I grew up in a house where conflict was a very normal thing.
Okay.
Not to say that it was a conflict-based environment, but no one ever shied away from conflict.
Okay.
Like if someone had a problem with you, they were going to tell you that they had a problem with you. And then the purpose of that was to hash it out in that moment. There was no No one ever shied away from conflict. Everyone addressed conflict immediately. And so I grew up in a house where that was a normal thing. And it it was a shock to me after meeting some friends and going out with a few people to realize that that's not the way that everyone grew up. And there are a lot of people that avoid conflict.
Yeah.
They don't like it. And so I've noticed that with more people than not.
Yeah.
And that was sort of the foundation of why I chose to be in a career where I could learn how to handle that, because it just came naturally because of the environment that I grew up in.
Which is really why I was so excited to have you on the podcast to have this conversation. Is it's those things that feel natural to you that are usually the things that you're the best at, and the things that oftentimes people sometimes even struggle to realize how special this skill set is that they have because it feels so natural. And yet you did this, in your career, sitting on the sales side and the procurement side. I have a pretty extensive background on the sales side, and I know what it takes to sell and work with people in procurement. And I also have a little bit of experience, not on the procurement side so much, but definitely in that it being a part of that decision on the other side. So I feel like I have a little bit of a grasp of it, but the fact that you have such an extensive background in both sides is such a unique gift. And then you took this gift and now you're teaching it to others. What was the catalyst for that? Because sometimes when people are so good at something, like, I'm sorry, I didn't let you answer, but
no, that's okay. It was a dare in a bar.
Was it really?
Yeah. As all good stories start,
Say
it was after
more.
a few drinks.
Okay.
I was probably about maybe just over 5.5, almost 6 years ago.
Yeah.
I was in a pub with a few friends and we were having a few drinks, and I was moaning about how there was no great negotiation content out there. And as all good friends should do, they told me, well, don't moan about it, do something about it. And so after a few more drinks, I decided, yeah, that's a great idea. I am going to do something about it. And then went home and immediately spent far too much money on podcasting equipment on Amazon. And that was the birth of the Negotiations Ninja podcast. And the first few podcasts I hosted were in my basement next to my washing machine in my little townhouse. And that became the start of everything. After that, it started to gain some popularity, and people started reaching out to me to say, hey, do you deliver training? And I was like, no, I don't. At the time, still had a full-time job.
Okay.
And more and more people started reaching out. And eventually I was like, maybe I should. And so I did, and started taking vacation time out of my full-time job to go and deliver training, moonlighting on the side. And one thing led to another, and Negotiations Ninja was born. I had to make a decision to go full-time eventually. So I decided to do that.
What a blessing to so many of us who will now get to learn from you as a result of that. And I love that you started this as a podcast. That was like your first thing. Yes. And that people started asking you for training, and your initial answer was no. And then you get asked a few more times, and pretty soon you're like, well, I guess I could do this. In NLP, we call that a convincer strategy. A certain number of times somebody has to say no to something before they say yes.
That's right.
So it's interesting to know, now you all know, Mark has just given you some insight into him, that his convincer strategy is you have to ask him multiple times and let him say no before he's going to even consider it. So that's amazing. Right. That's amazing. Okay. So we're going to dig into these questions. Thank you so much for, like I said, being willing to have this conversation with me. So my first question is, if I got to stand in for you for a day, so lucky me, I get to be Mark for a day, what would I have to do, or how would I have to think in order to be an effective negotiator?
A big part of my day is contacting either existing clients or prospects to convince them to buy more negotiation training or persuasion and influence training. And a lot of my day is talking to people to also teach them about negotiation. And I think the first thing that you would probably need to do is to read and consume as much as you can on negotiation, influence, and persuasion as you can. And then not only do that, but also try and apply it in all situations that you can where it's applicable and where it's most applicable. I've done a lot of hard work to try and apply as many tools as I can in my day-to-day life. And it sounds simplistic, but it is significantly more difficult than people realize, because it means every interaction I have has to be as well thought out as I can make it, even if it's on the fly, even if it's just a normal interactive scenario. For example, going to the coffee shop and asking for a discount, or being in a situation where I'm on the road and asking for an upgrade in a hotel. Those kinds of situations I've really tried to focus on applying a lot of negotiation tactics and knowledge and strategies to everyday interactions, so that I can try and practice it at scale. Because that's the most important thing that a lot of people miss with negotiation. And the same thing they do with sales as well, is it's a skill set. The more that you practice that skill set, the better you're going to get at that thing. Like anything in life, like athletes. There are born athletes, but if they don't work at it, that skill fades, right? And the person who may not have been born with those natural abilities, if they work at it, will surpass those naturally gifted athletes. The same is true for negotiation. The same is true for sales. The same is true for all things. So the more that you work at it, the better you're going to get. So that's what you would have to do on sort of a daily basis to be able to manage that. And then also, of course, just be comfortable with being on the road a lot.
Okay. So I love that you kind of broke this down already. There's some structure in what Mark has already shared with us. Read and consume and apply. I think those three things, they have to, like that last one, super important. Apply. You can't just read. You can't just consume. You have to apply. And I always liken this when I teach sales, is the skills that I'm teaching. A lot of it is about building muscle memory. So how you just described it, it's like, you've got to apply, and you do it in these situations. I teach a technique about creating curiosity, and I tell people, you do it with everybody you come into contact with. You try out your curiosity creating statement. I don't care if it's the person that you're ordering coffee from or who it is, because it helps you build that muscle. So this is super important if you want to become a better negotiator.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Because you've gotten me curious.
Oh, okay.
What is your creating curiosity statement?
My creating curiosity statement right now is if somebody says, oh, like, how are you? It's usually in how you answer some of your basic questions. So for me right now, if somebody says, how are you? I would say, oh, I'm great. Just about to launch my last masterclass of the year.
Fantastic. I like that.
Gives people the opportunity to go like, what's a masterclass? Or what's the topic? Or what does that even mean? Or who cares, Nikki? What do you want for your tea? Like whatever their response is. But for me, it's practice. It's just practice over and over and over again, because then when I'm talking to a client or prospective client, have this opportunity that I can position the idea of a masterclass of like, there's a masterclass coming up. It's the last one of the year. Would you be interested to hear more about it? Most people are going to say, yeah, tell me more.
Can I ask a follow-up question, and then I'll stop asking questions?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Here's the master negotiator.
What do you say when people ask you what you do?
What I do?
Yeah. So if you had to meet someone at a networking event, or maybe even just at a dinner where you didn't know folks, and they said, oh, hi, I'm Jim, or whatever, what do you do? And what would you say to that?
Well, the first thing that I do, just to give some structure to it, is I think to myself, what do I know about this person? And how can I tailor my answer to something that could potentially be interesting to them? So if we're at a party and I don't know anything about you, but I know that you like to come to a party at so-and-so's, function, or there's some context, I can also look at you and see a little bit. So I might say something like, I work with business owners and I teach them how to have more strategic conversations. So they're able to
I
close
like
more
that.
deals and make a bigger impact. Just because I'm looking at
trying to
you, you look
rethink how I
professionally
phrase that answer.
dressed, like there's something about the way you're showing up in the conversation.
Yeah.
If you're showing up in like, sweats and you're like, so what do you do? I might say, I run my own business. And that might be the end of it,
Right.
I don't know. We'll see.
Cool. I'm trying to think about how I rephrase my answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been thinking and trying on a few different things, but I like
What
that.
do
Thank
you
you very
say
much.
when somebody says, what do you do?
I teach people how to negotiate.
Yeah. I mean, so clear.
Yeah. I'm trying to be as clear as I can be, but also leave them wanting to be like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah. I always say, like, don't word vomit. Just give them enough of an answer for them to ask you a follow-up question. Now we're in real conversation. So now you've created curiosity. I think just using the word negotiate it's enough of a curiosity builder that you would draw most people in.
Yes, I would agree with you.
Yeah, it's so strong. Okay, so we talked about...
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail you.
No, you didn't. You're perfect.
Good.
So read, consume, and apply. And do this in all situations in your life. Test it out over and over and over again. These things that you're learning, in order to make it your own, you have to apply. So that's perfect. Okay. Next question is, what specifically would I have to do to behave like you when I am practicing this idea of being an effective negotiator?
I've been rethinking that a lot lately, actually. That's
Yeah?
a very interesting question. Because I've been rethinking what it takes for me to be as successful as I can be with what I do on a day-to-day basis. And for the first 4.5, 5 years of running this business, it was about just working as hard as I possibly could to build up my funnel enough that it was sustainable and to build up the business enough. And now I'm rethinking that slightly, in that over the last 4.5, 5 years, I've really neglected a lot of other things in the process of doing that first thing. So now I'm trying to focus significantly more on health and mental clarity more than anything, and sleep, which sounds odd for negotiation, but I'm finding that the more that I focus on health and sleep and mental clarity, the better I'm getting at decision quality, which sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but it's proving to be a really, really good thing for me. Because, for example, I had a deal the other day that I was really excited to close, and I got given a bunch of terms and conditions at closing that I wasn't anticipating from the counterparty.
Okay.
And they were terms and conditions that were really obtrusive to me, in terms of the insurance requirements that I would have to get the company to sign up for, as well as some of the liability that would be involved. Fantastic organization, wonderful people, but this was a die on the hill issue for them.
Okay.
And in the past, I would have gone through the process of getting the additional insurance and all of that. And then I did the math this time, fortunately enough, to be able to determine what is the actual cost of me going through this with my counsel and getting all the additional insurance. Previously, before, it would have been just about getting the logo, right? Getting the brand name, so that I could say, hey, I've worked with this particular company. So I would incur that additional cost without any additional thought. It would have been no problem at all. But now, because the business is significantly more established and I have enough credibility to be able to say, I don't need this anymore, I don't have to incur that additional cost. And that was a unique inflection point for me, where I thought to myself, isn't that interesting that now I have the clarity and the time to be able to say, no, I don't think I want to do that business because of the cost that it will incur and the amount of time that it will take to close. And that's nothing to say anything bad about the organization. They were wonderful people, and it's a wonderful organization, and they had to have this as a requirement for them. So I unfortunately had a very difficult discussion with them, and I had that the other day to say, hey, unfortunately, I'm going to have to say no to this. Let me refer you to someone else who I think would be a perfect fit for you. And so, yeah, that's been an interesting area for me to dive into lately. Has my workload dropped so that I have the time to be able to spend time on that? No, I've just decided to say no to things that are busy things in my business that I don't need to do and I shouldn't be doing. I should be giving to someone else to do. For the longest time, I was holding on to a lot of those things instead of empowering other people to do it. And now I'm not doing that anymore, which is interesting.
I think that's a new level of business. It also is a new level of stepping into a role as a leader, as a CEO, to be able to come from that mindset.
Yeah, I tell you what, it's not easy because I'm a bit of a control freak when it comes to that kind of stuff. And I'll certainly be the first person to tell you that, I have a really difficult time letting go of some things, but I've found it really good, which sounds obvious when you say it, but it's true.
But sometimes you need to say it in order for you to go like, oh yeah,
right.
That's, like we have to be able to verbalize these things. So I love what you shared there about really behaving like you. My next question is, what are your goals when it comes to being an effective negotiator?
To achieve the objectives that I set out prior to the negotiation. Or if I don't achieve those objectives, to walk away gracefully from the discussion. So there's two big things there. Most people, when they go into negotiations, are winging it. They have kind of an idea of what they want to get out of the negotiation. And for a lot of salespeople, it's, I want to get a good deal, or I want to get a sale.
Yeah, I want to close. Yeah.
I want to close.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean anything, right? Like, get a good deal is not, yes, obviously you want to get a good deal, but what does that actually mean? So what kind of price do you want to sell it at? What kind of terms do you want to sell it at? What kind of delivery structure do you want to sell it at? What kind of work do you want to be able to put into that? Those are the negotiable items, right? Getting a good deal is the outcome. It's not the driver of the outcome. So the first thing I do before I go into a negotiation is figure out what is the aspirational goal or goals that I want to get out of this, and then what are the drivers of those aspirational goals. And if I can achieve those drivers, I will have successfully completed that negotiation. And if I can't, then I walk away gracefully from that conversation.
What is an example of walking away gracefully? What does that mean to you?
Instead of, I think for a lot of people, because they conflate negotiation with conflict, they might say something like, oh, we can't make this deal work. This has been a waste of my time. I'm done. Right. And so they kind of they walk away in a bit of a huff.
Yeah.
Instead of doing that, when I say walk away gracefully, you would say something to the effect of, Nikki, unfortunately, it appears as though we can't come to a deal that fits within the acceptable outcomes that I've defined for this negotiation before I came in. It doesn't look like we're going to be able to get there. Now, is this a deal that you think you'd be prepared to walk away from? Because I'm kind of at that point. At that point, the counterparty is going to go, okay, well, let's have a discussion about this. What is these additional things that you want to try and get towards? Maybe that reignites the negotiation. You can get those things done. If it doesn't, and the person says, yeah, I think I'm kind of stuck where I am, then I would say, I certainly appreciate the amount of time and the amount of effort that you've put into this. I realize that you have certain things that you can't agree to, in much the same way that I have certain things that I can't agree to. I'd love the opportunity to be able to work with you again at some point in time. Please feel free to contact me if any of those things on your end change, in much the same way that I will also contact you if any of the things on my end change. Let's shake hands. All of the day. Now that's walking away gracefully. Instead of saying like, this is not going to work. This has been a waste of time. I don't even know why we did this. Always leave the door open for another opportunity that may come down the road, because you have no idea whether or not those goals on the counterparty side might change. And also circumstances may change on your side. You don't know that yet. So always leave that door open. Never close it.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I'm so, so glad that you brought that into this conversation. So for you, the listener, what Mark just said is so important. I think it's important in sales. I think it's important in life that you leave the door open, because things change. Right. Things change for the other person and things change for you. So I know, coming from the industry that I came from, there was a lot of, I don't know if this was in your corporate career too, but in the industry, in the tech space that I was in, there was a lot of times where somebody would have, a business card that said one company name, and 2 years later, it was a different business card, different company name. So it was so important that you never knew this person that maybe was a competitor at this other company, 2 years later is now working alongside you, or this person is now a decision maker on a deal because they used to be a competitor, but now they actually work for the client or the customer that you're trying to earn. There was always that piece. And so such an important aspect to business. I learned that lesson one time the hard way. And luckily I only needed to learn it once, where it was like, you do not want to burn that bridge.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, I've had to learn it several times.
Okay. Okay, so my next question for you is, how do you know that you're achieving these goals, these drivers that you've set to be an effective negotiator? What are the cues? How do you have some realization of like, yeah, I'm on track?
When you come to an agreement on those drivers. So for example, if you said, hey, I want to make more money, that was the goal that you had coming in, that was the outcome. Let's say you're going in to renew a contract, for example, and you said, I want to make more money. Well, what are the drivers that drive making more money? Is it increasing price? Is it increasing volume? Is it cross-selling some additional things? Is it upselling some other services that you might have? There could be a number of different things. So as long as you're hitting those things that are the drivers, then you know that you've achieved that goal. I think what a lot of people think that if they get the deal, then they've been successful. That's not necessarily true, because that deal is only successful if you get the things that you want to get out of the negotiation. You could get a deal that's a really bad deal that is actually very detrimental to your business. In fact, there are some deals that are significantly worse if you get them than if you don't get them. So I would say to you, if you're thinking about like getting the deal as the successful outcome, think about the components of that deal that make the deal successful and drive towards the negotiation of those components. And it doesn't have to be super complex. It could be price and terms and service level. Like, it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. But think about what you're trying to negotiate into the deal that makes it worth it for you. And then also think about each of those things flexibly enough that it gives you a range of acceptable outcomes for each of those drivers. So for example, some people say, well, if I don't get a 10% price increase on this renewal, then I will have failed. And then I ask the question, well, what if you get 9? Would that be okay? And they say, well, yeah, that would be fine. And then I say, okay, well, what if you get 8? And they say, well, yeah, I'd be okay with that. And so we start working down to get to a point where they say, okay, 4% would be the point where I think that would be terrible. Like, there's no way I could accept anything below 4%. I was like, okay, great. Now what we've done is we've established a range of acceptable outcomes for you for price.
Yes.
Before we had this conversation, you told me anything less than 10 was a failure. But now we've decided anything between 4 and probably 12 is something that you're shooting for. So will you have failed if you don't get 10%? No, it won't be perfect, but it'll still be a deal that makes money for you, and it'll be a deal that makes sense for you. So getting people wrapped around the idea that it doesn't have to be binary is really, really important, because people think in black and white terms a lot of
Yes.
the time and absolutes. And absolute thinking in negotiation can sometimes be very dangerous because you leave a lot of great deals on the table that you could have otherwise found to be very successful.
I love that you shared this. I just had this conversation recently on another podcast with somebody. We were talking about a different topic, but I was talking about in NLP, we teach there's a difference between having digital thinking, which I think is what you're referring to as binary. It's like yes, no, black, white, all,
Right.
nothing, true, false, on, off kind of thing. I was compare it to like a light switch. You've got two options. It's on or it's off. You won or you lost, right? But realistically, where there's freedom and when there's flexibility is having analog thinking, which is kind of like the dimmer switch, how you can like click it up just one little bit and then a little bit more and then a little bit more, and how it's this progression. So the way you've just described this of like, well, if it's 10%, if it's not 10%, it's a fail. And then you go, well, what about 9%? You walk away. If you can only get 9, well, no, I'm going to take 9. Well, what about 8? And it's like you're helping people get into what from an NLP standpoint is analog thinking. And that's where freedom lies. That's where I think success lies as well.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds very, very similar. I've never done any NLP stuff. It sounds super interesting. It is something that I've always wanted to do. You and I need to chat afterwards because I need your guidance on that.
Okay. I'm happy to offer. I mean, I'm like an NLP geek, so I love the whole concept. But realistically, my guess is if you started studying NLP, you would go, I already know this. I already do this. Oh, I know this. I just never called it that. Or there's a lot of crossover. I have a really good friend that is a behavioral economist. And so she's always talking about, the studies and the research behind stuff. And she'll call it one thing. And I'll be like, oh, in NLP, it's this, this, and this. And she's like, in behavioral economics, it's this, this, and this. It's all the same stuff, but it's just how you define it, I think. So
neat.
Yeah, I love that.
Very, very cool.
Okay, so my next question for you is, in a negotiation and to be effective, how do you know that it's time to really pay attention and go back to this, like, I've got my technique, I know what to do here. What are some indicators or some clues where it's like, okay, you need to be paying attention because in order to be effective, these are some clues for you?
Do you mean what are the cues from the counterparty that you should be paying attention to?
Yes. Thank you for helping me clarify.
I think the biggest thing that you need to do whenever you're trying to watch for any kind of behavioral clues or vocal cues or body language cues are what are called clusters. There's a lot of negotiation and body language information out there that would say something to the effect of, okay, if the person looks up and to the left, that means they're lying. Or if they're fidgeting, that means something else.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily true. Instead, what you should be doing is looking for clusters of behavior. So if they do, 4 or 5 things together, that may be an indication that there is something else going on. It is incredibly hard to be able to pinpoint what emotions someone might be feeling, or whether or not there's deception, or whether or not someone is nervous or anxious. So I would say instead of trying to really focus on that, I would focus on asking better qualifying questions and asking targeted qualifying questions. So if, for example, you knew that something was important to someone, you would ask a better open-ended qualifying question for that thing instead of trying to see what their body language gesture might be or their vocal cue might be. Because sometimes those body language gestures lead us astray if we don't know how to read them correctly. It takes a really long time to be able to master that. And I am certainly not the body language expert. You'll need to chat with guys like Joe Navarro on that kind of stuff, former FBI behavioral analyst.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be better for folks to ask a qualifying or a clarifying question. So, for example, if I knew that your organization really struggled out of COVID-19 to get people to come back to the office and to staff up in a particular area. And I knew that was a big problem for you. And I sold labor services to augment those things. I might ask you a better qualifying question of what are some of the challenges that your organization had coming out of COVID-19 relative to getting the people that you need to do the job? It's a very focused, open-ended question, focused on the specific thing that I think you might have had trouble with that is lined up perfectly with the thing that I sell to ensure that I create an opening so that we can have a discussion about that. And I would say focus on creating more conversation with someone that is focused on the real problems they may be having. Where many of us struggle, I think, with conversation is that we put a lot of effort into small talk, which is great. Don't get me wrong. Small talk's really, really important. But at the detriment of having a real conversation about the problem that the customer is facing. So think very, very, very hard before you go into the conversation about some things that may be important to that customer, and then ask those questions, and then be so bold as to say, what are the challenges? Or what are the things that you're really struggling with when it comes to this thing? Because the only way you're going to know is to ask, instead of guessing based on behavioral, body language, vocal intonation cues.
I love that you commented on that too. With my background in NLP, we are taught eye accessing cues. We're taught body language cues, and it's not something that I teach. I do not teach eye accessing cues in my sales training, specifically for the reason that you just said, is that people start to make assumptions.
Yeah.
That are oftentimes false.
Yes.
I think one of the biggest mistakes people make in sales, but I wonder if you would agree for negotiations as well, is that we project limiting beliefs. There's two things. We project limiting beliefs onto the other person, like we're making up in our head our own limiting beliefs. We project it onto somebody else. And the second thing is we act as if we can read their minds. Like all of a sudden, I've got this ability to read minds.
Yeah.
And it's this assumptive thing that can get us in so much trouble.
I agree entirely with you. I think it's a serious problem, especially in negotiation. There are some people that will take like one of those on-demand body language courses from the next expert on those things. It is so hard to be able to do those things well.
Yes.
I'd recommend just asking better questions.
I agree.
It's just so hard. Like, and all of the research that I've read on it, like, if you look at some of the original research that was done, there's a gentleman by the name of Paul Ekman who studied
I love Paul Ekman's work.
Folks from all over the world to identify what facial expressions are universal across all different cultures. And there's reams and reams of research on it, and it talks about micro expressions.
Yeah.
But the micro expressions are so fast that he had to slow it all the way down on film to be able to see where those things are. And in fact, there are universalities on micro expressions across multiple different cultures. But to catch it real time, almost impossible with the naked eye unless you've trained extensively to be able to do that. So I'd just say be very, very careful about that. Like for example, you'll see the tabloids or those kinds of internet websites that say, look at the body language cues of Meghan Markle and Harry over this issue that they're facing. Like, hey man, you have no idea what these people are experiencing, and to infer that this is how they're feeling as a result of the body language that you are reading is crazy. It's crazy.
Yes. I love when people try to explain to me, well, I've studied some NLP and I know that because this person looked up and to the, left, they just told a lie. And I was like, well, what's your context?
Yeah. What's the context
for that?
What else did you observe?
Yeah. Do you already know you have to have a baseline, just like a lie detector They
Right.
don't just ask you the question to see if you lie or not. And they can't just tell from one question whether or not they have to establish a baseline.
That's
Did
right.
you
Because
establish
they're
a
looking for
baseline?
deviations from that
Yes.
baseline.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's always the piece where, and the same when I see these people, I'm like, this is what this body language means. And I'm always like, how do they know that? Where's the
Right.
baseline? What was established to say? Yeah. So anyway, I love that you commented on that. Ask better questions. This is, I think, one of the mic drop moments that Mark has given us. Ask better questions. If you want to be a better negotiator, ask better questions. Ask specific questions that are open-ended. Brilliant.
Yes. As my friend
So
Dan
brilliant.
Oblinger says, he's a hostage negotiator. He's written a great book on listening, but he says, ask questions that deserve answers. And I thought that's uniquely poetic. And of course, it's Dan who says this because he's such a poetic guy, but it's true. Ask questions that deserve answers. Don't just ask for the sake of asking. There has to be an intention behind your ask.
Would you say Dan's last name again? Because I think I stepped on it.
Oblinger. Oblinger. He wrote a really great book called Life or Death Listening.
Life or Death Listening? What a great title.
It's a great title, yeah. Which really lines up well with his hostage negotiation background, but great guy.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you for sharing that resource. That's awesome. All right, so last question for you. To be an effective negotiator, how do you know when to stop?
I'm going to take this two different directions.
Okay.
So you know when to stop if you've gotten a deal that meets your objectives. Because the deal's done. Get them to sign on the paper, and you're done. And then it comes to fulfilling that agreement. So just make sure that you can actually fulfill the agreement. And then if you feel like you're pushing too hard through the negotiation, this is the second thing that I've taken away from this question. If you feel like you're pushing too hard and the person says no, that is not the end of the negotiation. Most often, you have only just started to get the additional value that you should be getting out of that deal. Just because the person says no doesn't mean they've said no to the whole deal. It means they may have said no to this particular part of the deal. And they may not have said no to even this particular part of the deal, but the way that you phrased that part of the deal. And so it's very hard to know where the red line is when you're pushing hard in a negotiation. Much of that comes with experience, as weird of an answer as that is. But you're only going to know if you push it. And that sounds like something that's, in most areas of your life, I wouldn't give you this advice. But in negotiation, you're only going to know where the red line is for the other party if you push it to that red line. And even if they get into a huff and say, this is outrageous, I can't believe you've asked for that, and they walk away, that deal's still not done. Because you can always go back to them and say, hey, I'm sorry if I offended you. Appears that I may have asked for something that you may deem or think as unreasonable. I'd like to discuss that with you and learn more about that. And now when you can learn more about that, now that becomes something that's another talking point for you to be able to have. So as long as you, and I always coach people to approach every request with 4 characteristics: be polite, kind, courteous, and respectful. If you're polite, kind, courteous, and respectful, there's really no limit to what you could ask for, because you know you're going to get a no anyway. So why not ask? As long as you're polite, kind, courteous, and respectful, most of the time you're going to be okay.
Brilliant. Polite, kind, curious, and respectful. Those 4 things. Courteous, excuse me. I think it's curious. Too. That's because I'm a terrible speller, so I can't even read my own writing. So interesting. Okay. Polite, kind, courteous and respectful.
Correct.
And then you can only find out where the red line is
whatever you want
by pushing to the red line. Yeah.
You'd be surprised at how many things you can get a yes to if you're just polite, kind, courteous, respectful.
And would you also add to this that you also have to ask?
You have to.
Yes.
How would you know if you don't?
Yes.
The question that I asked because asking is, I get it, but asking is fear-inducing. It's a legitimate thing. Happens to a lot of people. But the question that I would ask those that are afraid of asking is, what is the probability of you getting what you want if you don't ask? 0.
0. Yes.
So if you want to dramatically improve the probability of you getting the things that you want, you kind of have to. No one's just going to give you something. You're not working with your mother, right? This person doesn't love you the way that your family loves you. You have to ask.
You have to ask. Be willing to ask and do it by being polite, kind, courteous, and respectful.
Correct.
I think we all need to have that like on a sticky on our computers or wherever.
Yeah, and to be fair, it's hard. I lose track of it all the time, but it is a mantra that I try and live by.
Yeah, when you can take a step back. I love that. All right, so we wrapped up this portion about the negotiation. Is it okay if I ask you a few other little questions about you? My question for you would be, how do you celebrate your wins?
This is really good. Now we're getting deep into the psychology.
I want to know how the negotiator, the expert
I have been
negotiator
historically bad at celebrating wins.
Okay.
And I really beat myself up on it and when I get a win, I'm like, well, you should have gotten that win. Like, obviously, there's no reason to celebrate. You're a dummy. Just keep going and keep working. Okay. I have recently learned that that's a very bad strategy for happiness.
Going back to the mental health stuff that you were talking about.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So now what I'm trying to do is after I achieve a certain goal, there's little things that I'll set for myself and things that I might buy for myself if I achieve that goal. For example, at the end of this year, I will have achieved a big sales goal for myself. I'm almost there. I will secure it. And I'm going to buy myself a watch that I've always wanted. So I'm going to do that at the end of the year. And so there's things like that I've set up for myself now, and also for my family that have become much better because they see me, working hard and maybe taking time away from spending time with family. They've got to get something out of it as well. So, we'll go to a cabin or we'll go on vacation or something like that. I think that's really, really important now. I didn't then.
Well, I'm excited that you are taking this opportunity to recognize that and make some changes and really celebrate your wins. That's amazing.
Thank you.
And congratulations on your sales goal.
Thank you.
As a sales professional, I have to say, I love when people exceed their sales goals.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah, for sure. All right. What's something that people would be surprised to learn about you?
What would people be surprised to learn about me? Probably not very surprised, but my hobby is to lift heavy things in the gym. Lift it up and put it down again. Okay. I try to lift it heavy weights.
Yeah.
And that maybe isn't surprising, but that's
I would never guess that.
Okay, good. Great. I give the impression that I'm not a gym rat. That's fantastic.
Well, I can only see you like from shoulders up.
Chest level up. Perfect.
But lifting heavy things, I don't think anybody's ever said that.
Yes.
I actually have a couple more questions, but I'm going to throw this one in here because I'm so curious. What is a question that you wish people would ask you but rarely do?
Can I have a deal?
Say more about that, please.
No one ever asks for a deal.
Oh my gosh.
So interesting. I teach and sell negotiation training for a living, and hardly anyone ever asks for a deal. Now, are there any deals to be had? Of course, if you have enough volume.
Yeah.
but no one ever asks.
Wow.
It's weird.
I'm so glad I asked
Which
that question.
reaffirms my belief that more negotiation training is needed.
Yes. Yes. There is such a need for you in this marketplace. Yes, for sure. All right. What's something exciting going on in your business right now?
I just hired a new salesperson.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm very excited about it. I think he's going to do very, very well. He's going to be responsible for a very big geography. So we'll see how it goes.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And how can people listening right now, how can they get in touch with you? How can they connect, learn more, get some negotiation training from Mark? What's the best way?
Easiest way is to get a hold of me on LinkedIn. Just
Okay.
search my name. Or go to our website, which we are relaunching. When do you think this might go live, Nikki?
We're a couple weeks out. We're probably maybe 7 or 8 weeks out.
Okay. So by the time this goes live, my new website will be live. So go to negotiations.ninja. You can find out more about our training there.
Perfect. Perfect. Mark, thank you so very much for sharing and coming on. It's just such a delight. And I feel like I learned a lot from you today. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Great questions.
Thank you. And for you, the listener, thank you so much for being here, for sharing, for connecting. Would you please share what your biggest takeaway from today was and, connect with Mark and tag him on LinkedIn for the episode and me as well. I'm so curious to know what was your biggest takeaway from today's topic and anything that you liked and will absolutely implement. Remember, Mark says you can't just consume, you have to apply as well. So please do that. I wish you continued success. Thank you for listening. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for listening to Sales Maven. Visit us online at yoursalesmaven.com/maven for more resources to boost your confidence and skills.